Second Time Around, by David Hirst. Chapter 2. When I came to, I was standing in a small field on a sunny day. I looked around and found that I was stood halfway between a coat and a bag which appeared to be forming makeshift goalposts. A short distance to the side of me was a picnic table. Sat at the table was my mother. She looked much younger and quite attractive in a non-weird incest way. Out in front of me, only a few feet away, was my dad. He was dribbling a Mickey Mouse football round some imaginary defenders whilst providing a running commentary. This was getting weirder by the minute, as my dad had died of a heart attack when I was 14. It was at this point that I strongly suspected that I might be dead. I had to admit that it wasn't quite how I imagined it, but I would certainly take this over nothingness or horned men prodding me with pitchforks. I hadn't been that bad in life, so perhaps this could be heaven. It wasn't all clouds, angels and harps, but if I wasn't mistaken, then this was one of my first memories, if not my first, and in addition to that, it was one of my happiest. Wait a minute. If this is my first memory, then my dad's about to smack. I was knocked to the floor as Mickey Mouse head-butted me at 30 miles an hour. I sat up to see the ball bouncing over the railings and onto the road, nearly causing a car accident. Within seconds, my mum had come rushing over to my aid. I backed away at first. Well, it did seem strange. Less than an hour ago, her only concern with my bust-up face was whether or not my blood could be removed from my brother's shirt. After a few minutes of overprotective petting, my mother finally released me from her maternal grip. My dad had, with great embarrassment, retrieved the football from a group of angry motorists and returned to us. One thing I never remembered about that day was the look my mother gave my dad at that moment. Even if I had noticed that look then, I certainly wouldn't have realized its significance. It was the same look that Vicky had given me the other week when I had the audacity to finish work early and return home in time to see my son at my mother's house. My mother repeated that very same look when my dad asked me if I wanted to continue playing. "Maybe later," I said. "I fancy something to eat right now." After having a wonderful picnic of butterless jam sandwiches and a packet of crisps, to which I was amazed to find were filled to the top for a change, we set off home. As I rode back home, without a seatbelt, in the back of our old Ford Escort Mark II, I looked out of the window at all the shops that I used to frequent as a child. Some of them I didn't even remember, and none of them existed today. I used this time to try and think about what was actually happening to me. The word "try" was certainly the most appropriate word, as my mother had asked me every 2 seconds if I was all right. Focus was essential as I came close to saying, "What do you care?" on numerous occasions. The conclusion I came to was that I was dreaming. I was trying to think at what point I had gone to sleep. I suspected, as it seemed the most logical explanation, that I dropped off to sleep in the car while I was waiting for Adam. I was hoping that I had fallen asleep sometime before Vicky had left me, or better still, that I had fallen asleep at the point of my life that I am experiencing now. When we arrived at home, my parents went into the kitchen. To a 2-year-old this may not seem anything to worry about, but to a 39-year-old with a significant breakup under his belt, I knew this was to argue. I needed to get my head around things, so I made a roll-up and sat down to think. I realized this wasn't such a good idea when my 2-year-old healthy lungs rejected my bad habit instantly. Worse still, my parents entered the room as I coughed my guts up. I got a "what the hell are you doing?" off my mother before she turned her attentions to my dad. She gave him a roasting about him leaving his dirty cigarettes lying about. It pained me to see my dad trying in vain to protest his innocence against my mother's more convincing argument of, well, he didn't make it by himself. I would have admitted to making it if it wouldn't have caused more harm than good. I could see it would result in my mother accusing my dad of putting words into my mouth. My mother stormed up to the bathroom with my dad following helplessly behind. I heard the door slam and the rattling of the lock, followed by a few faint words from my dad. Although I barely heard my father's words, I knew exactly what he was saying. Furthermore, I knew exactly what the trouble was all about. My mother was pregnant with Mark. And more to the point, Uncle Lee was the father. This would explain why my dad was happy about the pregnancy and my mother wasn't. My dad came into the room with a puzzled expression on his face. "I just don't understand it," he said to me, like he was talking to an adult. I felt so sorry for him. "How did you manage to make such a great roll-up?" This made me laugh. "I learned from the best," I replied. That evening we watched TV. I spent this time sat on my father's lap, which was obviously making my mother uncomfortable. I was sure she mouthed the words "he knows something's up" several times to my father. When my mother left the room for a brief moment, my dad began tickling me. I laughed uncontrollably until everything hit me. I was so overcome by emotion that I burst out into tears. It was then that my mother re-entered the room. "What did you do to him?" she seethed. "She really was touchy today." My dad shrugged. This was turning out to be as equally a perplexing day for him as it was for me. "He didn't do anything to me. I'm just so happy. I wish this night would never end," I explained with a sincerity that was beyond my apparent years. But unfortunately, with my 2-year-old body to add to my long and eventful day, I just couldn't keep my eyes open for much longer.